All right, welcome back. Now I've got four main things that I want to talk about today. The first thing is that I watched Anthropic's video on prompt engineering and what exactly is prompt engineering, so I want to talk about that. The second thing I want to show you is that I actually ended up using some of that information from the video to then craft some prompts for my own little JavaScript learning app that I'm building. So I want to show you guys kind of what I did with the information from that video to then apply it to my own project. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then the third thing is I want to talk about this idea of day trading attention and just kind of how interest-based algorithms have changed the way that social media works these days. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just the importance of patience. So those are kind of the main key topics that we're going to be chatting about today. And let's get into it. So prompt engineering. What is it? Why are so many people talking about it? And why is it actually important? Now, here's what I learned from watching Anthropic's video. Prompt engineering is defined as the art and science of asking the right question to get the best possible response from an AI. Because LLMs don't think and understand the way humans do. Instead, they generate responses based on patterns that they've learned, which is why the way you word your prompting is so important, because it actually plays a big effect on the quality of the response from the LLM. I remember when the initial hype came around AI and a lot of people were trying to figure out how to use ChatGPT and how to prompt it properly. And a lot of these online gurus were telling them to assign it a role. So they'd be like, you've been a content expert for 25 years, and then they would give it a bunch of criteria, and then they'd be like, now you can start asking it questions. But realistically, at least with the models now, at least according to Anthropic, that doesn't matter. You don't need to be giving it roles. These LLMs are intuitive enough that they don't need you to be assigning it roles. But the idea is to basically think of these LLMs as someone who is super educated and super capable. They just don't have the context or the understanding of the overall project like yourself. And so when you're talking to them, kind of give them like a brief before you start giving them things to do. The idea is to be like, hey, my name's Keegan. We're working on this project. These are all the things that we have these are all of our criteria. These are all the things that I need done. And if you structure it that way, it gives the LLM a lot more context to work with instead of you just giving it single problems at a time or assigning it some role that it doesn't necessarily even need because there's still no context around why they're needed to perform that role. And then just some kind of like good practices that they were talking about was essentially every time you go to prompt something or every time you go to talk to ChatGPT or Claude, once you write out your prompt, think if I gave this prompt to another human being, would they actually be able to comprehend it and understand the context around what I'm saying to perform the task that I want ChatGPT to do or Claude to do? Which I thought that was also kind of smart because it's like, if I want ChatGPT to perform some sort of specific task and I wrote out this prompt, if I gave this prompt to another person and they couldn't do it, it only kind of makes sense that ChatGPT would also struggle with it. You know what I mean? So I thought that was also kind of interesting. And then the last thing that I really liked that stood out to me was essentially giving your prompts fail-safes built inside of them so that let's say you have ChatGPT or one of these other LLMs performing a task for you and it messes up or it starts hallucinating. If you build these fail-safes inside of your prompts, a lot of the time what'll happen if you don't do this is that let's say you give ChatGPT a prompt and then it doesn't actually understand what you mean, but it's just going to do something anyways. It's just going to spit something out. But if you throw a fail-safe word in there or a fail-safe protocol, if it doesn't understand what to do specifically for you because it's just confused with the prompting or it just starts hallucinating, one of the cool things you can do is build in one of these fail-safes, and then instead of it just performing a task, it will second guess itself, and you can basically have it say something like could not perform task instead of just spitting out a bunch of shit, and then you can start questioning it and asking why it wasn't able to perform that task and building your prompts out better so that it can actually understand what it's trying to get done. Instead of just guessing and assuming what you want it to do, you can tell it specifically what you want it to do by having these fail-safes in place so that if it does get confused, it can stop itself and ask for more input, which I thought that was pretty cool as well. Now, the second thing I want to talk about, and with all of that in mind with the prompt engineering, I wanted to show you guys how I use that information to implement it into my own little JavaScript learning app that I'm building, just to kind of solidify the information further in my brain, and then also just give me an actual real world example of how this would work. So this is my JavaScript random question generator. And essentially what I had going on before was all of the questions, whenever I click randomly generate, there's a bunch of boilerplate templates that every time a question was randomly generated, it would just pull from these boiler templates. And I really just hated the way it looked. It was always just so boring and it kind of got really just redundant and easy to use. So what I wanted Cursor to do for me was take this information that I just learned from this prompt engineering video and get rid of all of these boilerplate templates and actually have them be auto-generated questions, like completely random auto-generated questions. So this was my prompt that I used to get it going. And then right at the end there, you can see if you cannot perform the task, please just output cannot perform ATM, which is just obviously at the moment. So it went through, it changed a bunch of the JavaScript going on here. And then basically what happened is I went to click start. And then once I clicked start and I outputted my solution, it said it was correct, even though I knew it wasn't correct. And then it just moved me on to the next section and it was the exact same question. So I was like, well, what the hell was that? Why'd that happen? And basically what happened was my create test function was returning true for every single solution that was inputted by the user, whether it was true or not. So now that all of that's fixed, it is properly auto-generating the questions now, which I'm super happy about. Which means when you now choose your level and click start, it actually is going to auto-generate it. Gives you a proper word problem now. And then even when you ask for hints, it gets proper hints. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, this next thing I want to talk about is this idea of day trading attention. So with the TikTokification of social media, the main thing that changed when it comes to social media these days is the fact that everything is based off of these interest-based algorithms. Now, what that means is essentially your follower count doesn't matter as much as it used to. So for example, in the days of YouTube when it first came out, the algorithms were built to basically show all of your content to the people that followed you. That's why in the early days of things like Instagram, you'd only see posts from your friends because the algorithms only showed you posts from people that you followed. But with TikTok coming into the game, that's where everything changed because they started using interest-based algorithms. And the way that those work is essentially instead of just showing your content to people that follow you, the algorithms are designed to analyze your content and then push it out to people that are actually interested in the things that you're talking about or whatever niche you're appealing to. Which is why you'll see so many accounts nowadays that may have millions of followers, but only a little bit of engagement because they have a lot of what people would call legacy followers. Even for myself, I've experienced this because my main Instagram page used to be a lot more focused on producer content and the music industry. And I built up like 10,000 followers on that account. And then when I started switching niches, I noticed that a lot of the engagement started going down because I'd switched niches. And now the people that were following me weren't interested in the content that I was putting out. And so because of that, they no longer were engaging with my content because one of the things I learned is that it's easy to train your algorithm a certain way, but it's really hard for the algorithm to unlearn things. So because of that, my main page that I was using on Instagram is so music heavy. Now that I've switched kind of more coding and entrepreneurial things, it has a hard time understanding where to put my content. But to wrap it all up, the reason I'm telling you all this is because it's important to understand the algorithms and how they work. And essentially what this means now is that your follower count doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how good your content is and how well it's resonating with people. Because if your content is good and it actually resonates with people and people can relate to it, that's what's going to allow it to get pushed out more by the algorithm, because the algorithm favors things that people are interested in. And so if people are interested in your content, more of it's going to get pushed out in front of more people, and then more people will see it, and the algorithm will continue to push it out further and further, which is why creating good quality content and being relatable is super important, because that's what's going to get people interested in you, which is then in turn going to have the algorithm push it out more. So that's kind of the reason why it's so important to really understand who you're trying to speak to. And now the last thing I want to talk about, just before I let you go, is the importance of patience and how you're not behind just because you see some 23-year-old or 19-year-old on social media who's absolutely crushing it and has millions of dollars. And I think it's also good to realize that these times in our lives right now, when we're, for all the 18 to 30-year-olds out there, these are the times that you'll look back on when you're older, like 80s, 90s, hopefully when you make it there, that you'll look back on and realize that these were the good old days. These are the days where we had the most fun. All the days of uncertainty and being broke and not knowing if any of this is going to work out in the end, which is why I think it's okay to slow down and enjoy the ride and just be patient. Because if you're working towards something every single day and you have a purpose that gets you out of bed, like that's the goal. That's the goal. I don't think people realize that so many of these guys out there who've had success and they've exited a company or they got to their goal and then all of a sudden they get depressed because they have no purpose anymore and they don't know what to do. And so I think it's okay that it takes a little bit longer for some people, because it just means that you have this purpose and something to get up for every single morning instead of achieving it right away and now being lost. And of course, like, there's levels to this and there's different advice for different times of our lives, obviously. But I think it's just a cool thing to remember that it's like, at the end of the day, when you're 80 years old, we'll look back and more than likely would give anything to be our 20-year-old selves again. So that's just kind of a cool perspective that I like to try and remind myself every once in a while. I'm really enjoying doing these videos where I just come up with some topics and then talk about it, just because these are all things that I find interesting, and it's just, I don't know. I like sharing it with you guys, and I've gotten enough good responses that I think I'm going to continue doing it. So like I said in the last video, if you guys have any topics that you want covered or want me to kind of dive deeper into, or just generally want me to cover, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to. So see you guys in the next one.